For a lot of players, myself included, Mafia 3 was a huge letdown that failed to live up to the extremely high standard set by its predecessors. Mafia 1 took us on a 30s mob trip that made use of GTA 3's design skeleton, but with realism and tone taking higher priority than building a city playground to be just evil in. Ambience and world detail elevated the first Mafia beyond a basic GTA clone and set the stage for its sequel, Mafia 2, to set the bar so much higher, giving me one of, if not possibly, my favourite game of the Xbox 360/PS3 era. Honestly, if you only take one thing from this video, it's that if you haven't played Mafia 2, you should do yourself a favour and correct that right now.
Vito, come on, let's go, andiamo. Meantime, I'll be sending you the cleaning bill for my coat.
Yeah, I'll change my address, you rat prick.
6 years later, Hangar 13 would continue the franchise, and despite specific praise for the setting and protagonist, it failed to capture the critical and sales success that Take-Two needed to consider it profitable. Several years after Mafia 3's lukewarm release, though, I've softened on it. So here is why I think that Mafia 3 not only deserved better, but is still worth playing today.
I see a red door and I want to paint it black. No colors anymore, I want them to turn black. I see the girls walk by just in their summer clothes. I have to turn my head till my darkness goes. I see a line of cars and they're all painted black.
Much like Mafia 1 and 2, the third entry storytelling style is unlike any other game on the market. Across the whole franchise, there's an intense commitment to the time period, whether that's through subtle visual stylistical choices that match up with the cliches of the decade they're based in, or something as simple as the soundtrack.
I fought the law, and the law can kiss my ass.
Mafia 3 is no different and succeeds wholeheartedly at creating the tone of its 1960s fictional take on New Orleans. Possibly more so than Empire Bay, Mafia 2's pseudo-version of 40s New York, New Bordeaux lives and breathes. Driving through the swamps or strolling past pedestrians on a rain-drenched street is remarkably immersive, and that's in no small part to the striking prejudiced behaviour our protagonist is subjected to while exploring. Unlike any other open-world game, Mafia 3 never lets you get comfortable in its environment. As a black man in the 1960s, Lincoln Clay can't walk down the street without racist remarks or side-eyes from the cops. Even hanging out inside stores for too long will draw the ire of some business owners and eventually lead to violence and the police being called.
Calling the cops on your ass.
He just snuffed out his lunch.
Someone's causing a commotion. Get away, yeah, hurry. Huh?
It's simply too much.
Help, please.
Get away! Get away!
Sit down.
It's not uncommon for blockbuster video games to touch on themes of race and discrimination in their stories, but going so far as to include them as a mechanic in the gameplay is a bold step that sets Mafia 3 far apart from the crowd, and in doing so makes the topic feel much more grounded. The portrayal of prejudice here isn't overt. As a matter of fact, it's rarely the point of the narrative. Instead, much like the real world, it's so entrenched in people's way of behaving, you can't help but feel despair over the oppressive nature that permeates the entire story. And that is a level of maturity I just don't expect from many AAA blockbusters. Although it is kind of funny that racism is tackled with such clear-cut sincerity, but real-life Playboy magazines featuring naked women who are either now very old or very long dead as collectibles is totally a non-bit of degrading fun, I guess. 2016 and Hangar 13 still thought gaming was a boys-only club. I don't know, it just seems pretty funny in a game that has so much to say about inequality. Oh shit, look, a Stanley Kubrick article. In many ways, Mafia 3 feels unlike a lot of big titles released today. New Bordeaux is relatively empty of distracting open-world fluff that plagues some higher-budget productions and every Ubisoft game, which is lucky because the rinse-and-repeat missions the main story has you pushing through can turn the game into a real drag, especially after you've stabbed your 1000th generic Mafia dude in the head. A mechanic like Shadow of Mordor's Nemesis system would have taken these boring open-world activities and given the players something to make them actually feel like they're taking over the city from real characters, instead of generic mob dudes you're stabbing in the face. I think the main crux of the game's issues all stem from the overindulgence on padding out the game's length. The combat is well made and enjoyable for the time, but Mafia 3 runs 10 hours too long for its own good. Since Mafia 3 released, 8 years of game development have gone by, which means it isn't as sleek as some contemporary options. But I always felt that Mafia 3's combat had a real crunchy weight to it that I rarely find with open world combat systems, and I was not disappointed when replaying it for this video. I was, however, very disappointed that all the great story beats are trapped behind hours of that rinse and repeat copy-paste open world bullshit. It's really a shame because when it is focusing on its story, I get some similar vibes to Red Dead Redemption 2. It's by no means as good as that, but at times I think it could have come very close.
You are a compulsive liar.
No need to be like that.
If the first two Mafia games are inspired by cinematic classics like Goodfellas and The Godfather, Mafia 3 takes more out of Rambo's playbook. So just like that film, the story never tries to go beyond a basic one-man army revenge plot. Even the Vietnam veteran drifter jacket vibe feels practically lifted straight out of First Blood. Instead of focusing on narrative twists and turns, Hangar 13 put their effort into a cliched story with an emphasis on character. Lincoln Clay and his gang of sidekicks, that includes the protagonist from the previous game, are all massively likable, and it's great watching them scheme and eventually deciding which to favour when handing out the turf you've taken over. I always side with my boy Vito, because when my boy Vito wants something, my boy Vito gets it. More than anything though, I find it great that we finally see a game about the Mafia use mechanics to partially simulate the decision making that comes with the job. Not that it's very complex mechanically, but you know, it's nice to see an attempt. Replaying the definitive edition for this video, I found it very jarring how good the story DLC is compared to the main game. When the focus is on the story and creating unique gameplay moments, it's really fucking fantastic. Much closer to Mafia 2's quality, and in some ways, even better. All 3 DLC packs give some much needed character growth to not just Lincoln, but the sidecast too. Each tells a random side story, and despite each only consisting of a few missions, none of them feel rushed. Sign of the Times tackles Lincoln's path through grief and puts him in the role of the protector as he tries to save a scared young woman from an evil cult. Cue some weird dream sequences caused by voodoo gas and a new investigating mechanic that reminds me of the Arkham games, and I'll admit, I got a touch of the feels from the somber ending while being completely taken aback by the brilliantly sudden change in tone and direction. The Stones Unturned DLC is maybe the least interesting of the 3, prioritizing a focus on combat over anything character-driven, but I still enjoyed the change in pace that the jungle environments provided. Plus, it was nice to build on that bond between Lincoln and his veteran CIA co-conspirator Donovan, who is great as comic relief in the main story, but doesn't really have much to offer beyond exposition. Lastly, and possibly my favourite, the Faster Baby DLC lets Lincoln finally have some fun. Which is wild because this is the heaviest emphasis the game puts on race as a subject matter. Tearing over ramps in the countryside, destroying carnivals, and growing weed are a much needed playful change to the usual dire tone of the main game. But it also doesn't let that goofiness overshadow the narrative severity that comes with a corrupt small town sheriff terrorizing civil rights activists. Despite that subject matter though, it's by far the most hopeful Mafia 3 gets, as well as being reminiscent of that masterful balance between fun and dark which the previous Mafia games are so beloved for. Leaving time for the characters to breathe and face challenges outside of the main revenge plot makes New Bordeaux so much more real to me. Unlike the main game, we actually see these characters move around the world instead of just existing when cutscenes are playing. Plus, some random mechanic additions give the overall game a wider sense of variety that lets you enjoy immersing yourself in something other than stabbing men in the face. They're a much needed break, and it's crazy because it's the exact opposite of how I feel about Mafia 2's DLC, which were just some half-arsed, tacked-on bullshit to make some easy extra money. If you've only ever played the vanilla version of Mafia 3, grabbing the definitive edition is worth it alone for these fairly short but brilliantly sweet expansions. I genuinely think if these had been in the base game as side content, people would have talked about Mafia 3 very differently. Just before I start wrapping up the video, I'd like to very quickly gush about the late 60s cars and how appropriately heavy they handle. Driving at high speeds feels dangerous, and if you crash, you feel the consequences. Unlike other mainstream games with driving as a focal point, like GTA 5 for example, where ploughing into another vehicle barely slows you down, meanwhile the car-based action sequences here are made immeasurably more satisfying because when you crash, you crunch. And that means pulling off a cool stunt or a near miss just feels so much cooler. I can't say the same for those not near misses that ground you to a metallic crunchy halt, but you can't have it both ways. I'd also be remiss if I didn't mention some of the pretty noticeable bugs that pop up on the odd occasion. Usually they're only small visual glitches which are pretty easy to ignore, but sometimes you get silly things like days being just a bit too sunny, or suicidal pedestrians jumping in front of your car instead of away from it. And, forgive me if this is just a skill black people have that a white guy like me doesn't know about, telepathic communication.
What do you want me to say? You gotta do a little fucked up shit to stop the big fucked up shit from happening.
We bury any bodies along the way.
Mafia 3 can't hold a candle to Mafia 2, or Red Dead 2, but it's still a unique game that I feel, through complete fault of its own, didn't get a fair shake when it came out back in 2017. Fingers crossed the recently announced Mafia The Old Country is reminiscent of this game's DLC and aims for more driven, focused content over trying to copy all the other lazy, cut-and-paste AAA games releasing around it. But now, I would very much like to know what you all think about Mafia 3, as well as the rest of the series. Are you as cautiously hyped for The Old Country as I am? Let us know in the comments, and if you're feeling extra generous, we love and appreciate any and all likes that we get. Also, for those in a position to do so, we have a Patreon that helps support future content. We don't lock off any content there, but any support is always greatly appreciated. Thank you for watching this Mafia 3 retrospective, I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks again for watching, and cheers.